So here we've got the directions of simplify and state your restrictions. So we factor, find our restrictions, and then cancel and put together what's left. So on the first one, the numerator should have turned into x plus 5 and x plus 2. And the denominator should have become x minus 5 and x plus 2. This one doesn't multiply, so we're just dealing with one fraction. So we set the denominators equal to 0 to find our restrictions. And remember, restrictions are the same as asymptotes and wholes. It's just we're not talking about what they look like on a graph anymore. So x can't equal 5 and x can't equal negative 2 are your restrictions. Next, I go back up here and I look to see if anything's the same on top and bottom. I can cross out the x plus 2's, so we're left with x plus 5 over x minus 5. Number 2, we're multiplying. All that really means is you have more to factor. So the first one, x squared minus 4, hopefully you factored that to x plus 2 and x minus 2. X squared minus 1 will factor into x plus 1 and x minus 1. 1 is considered a perfect square. Times, in the second parenthesis, x plus 1 on top can't be factored. And on the bottom, x squared and 2x, they have an x in common. And you're left with x plus 2. So now that we've factored everything, we take the denominator pieces and we set them equal to 0 to find our restrictions. So x plus 1, x minus 1, x, and x plus 2. So x cannot equal negative 1, x cannot equal positive 1, x can't equal 0, and x can't equal negative 2. So I have 4 restrictions for this one. Now we go back and we look for canceling. So I'm looking to see what's the same on top and anywhere on the bottom. Well, I have a pair of x plus 2's and I have a pair of x plus 1's. Now, to cancel this x out, you would have to have an x on the outside of another parenthesis. You can't cancel the x with this x because this is an x minus 2. It's a whole quantity. So on the top, we have left x minus 2. On the bottom, we have left x minus 1 and x. And think about how we write things. That x by itself, we're always going to put first, and then x minus 1 in parentheses. So here's your 4 restrictions along with your simplified answer. Here are your homework problems from last night, along with their restrictions. 14 was like the one where all you had to do was, since it was being multiplied as your restrictions were 0, and then you're simplifying it like a fraction. The 15 was on the bottom, which meant when you simplified it, what was left stays on the bottom. 15 and 16 and 18 had a GCF in them. 19, everything canceled out, which meant you were down to just 1, because you can't have a 0 and everything cancels, you're left with a 1. Feel free to pause this to check all of your work, and then unpause it when you're ready to finish the notes from yesterday. Yesterday we talked about simplifying and dividing, or multiplying. Today we're going to talk about dividing, which really is only one more step. So when we divide, the first thing you're going to do is change from division, since we're dividing fractions, to multiplication and flip the second fraction. Since it's a fraction, we have to use keep, change, flip, which means we multiply and we flip the second one only. We're going to factor our numerators and denominators. And we're going to set each factor of the denominator equal to 0 and solve for x. And of course, these are your restrictions. Now, here is the one difference. Because we flipped the second fraction, you originally had one denominator. When you flip it, it changes. So you're going to set the factor of the denominators and including original denominators. So you'll have more restrictions on these. And then just like with multiplying, we still cancel between top and bottom and rewrite as one big fraction. So our first example, the first thing we're going to do, and again, as you start practicing these, you might notice steps that you can skip, and that's fine, is I'm going to rewrite it, but I'm going to go keep change flip. So I'm keeping the first fraction. I'm changing from division to multiplication, and I'm flipping the second fraction. So now we start the factoring. Well, 2 minus x. I don't typically see 2 minus x. Usually it's like x minus 2. And in order to do that, we're going to have to pull out a negative 1. So this is one trick we haven't really seen. So when you see it written backwards with the minus going with the x, we want to flip it to write it like we normally would, which means we have to take out a negative 1. On the bottom, x squared, so we have a 1 times 1, which is 1, has to add up to 2. Well, the only way to make that happen is 1 times 1. So I have x plus 1 and x plus 1. Moving to the second fraction, x squared minus 1, we've already seen that that's a difference of squares, so x plus 1 and x minus 1. X squared plus 3x minus 10, so we've got 1 times negative 10, has to add up to 3. To multiply to the negative, add to a positive. 1 has to be positive, 1 has to be negative. And since the 3 is positive, the bigger one has to be positive. So 5 times negative 2. So x plus 5 and x minus 2. Now, restrictions. We have this denominator, we have this denominator, and this also used to be a denominator at the beginning. So I have to check the restrictions for all of those. So I have x plus 1 cannot equal 0. Well, I only need to write that one once, which means I don't need to worry about this one. Then I have x plus 5, x minus 2. Then I go to this one. Well, x plus 1 I already have, so I just have to add in x minus 1. So x cannot equal negative 1, negative 5, 2, and 1. And now the last thing is we look to see what we can cancel out. So I've got an x minus 2 here and here, so they're gone. I have an x plus 1 here, so I can only cancel it out with one other x plus 1. And now an x minus 1, there's not on the bottom, which means we've simplified or canceled as much as we can. On top, we have a negative 1 and an x minus 1. On the bottom, I have an x plus 1 and an x plus 5. Now, this negative 1, we don't typically see a negative 1 in a fraction. Typically, we just see it as a negative sign in the middle of the fraction. And there's your answer. So division is not that different from multiplication, with the exception of flipping it, and then you have more restrictions to find. So go ahead and try the U-try, Check with your neighbors as you're going through it, and then unpause this when you're ready to check the final answer. So here we go. Again, first thing I do is I rewrite it with keeping the first fraction the same, flipping from or multiplying, changing from dividing to multiplying, and flipping the second fraction. So now we're factoring. So the first one should have factored into x plus 4 and x plus 1. The bottom, we had to have them add up to a positive 1. So we're looking at a positive 4 and a negative 3 as factors. The second one, they had something in common. You could divide them both by 2x. So we take a 2x out, which leaves you with x minus 3. And then x squared minus 1, we've seen that one multiple times, x plus 1 and x minus 1. Now restrictions, and remember with division there's more restrictions. You have to find all of these. So we have x plus 4, x minus 3, x plus 1, x minus 1, and 2x. Because again, the x minus 3 we already have. So x can't equal negative 4, x can't equal 3, x can't equal negative 1, x can't equal positive 1, and x can't equal 0. So this time we had 5 restrictions. Now to the easy part. Canceling out what's on top with what's on bottom. X plus 4 should have been gone, x plus 1s, x minus 3s, and so we're left with 2x over x minus 1. So last two problems for division, one that we're going to do together and then your last one to do on your own. So for our example, again, first thing since it's a division problem is we need to rewrite it, keeping the first fraction, changing from division to multiplication, and flipping the second fraction. Now we start factoring. So the first one, we've got 1 times 10, which is 10, has to add up to negative 7. So it has to multiply to a positive 10, add up to a negative 7. So we're looking at negative 5 and negative 2. So x minus 5, x minus 2. The next one multiplies 1 times 15 is 15, add up to a negative 8. Once again, we're looking at multiplying to a positive, adding to a negative. So we're looking at negative 3 and negative 5. So x minus 3, x minus 5. Second fraction, at 1 times negative 18, it's negative 18, add up to 3. So we're looking at 6 times negative 3. Now, the denominator is 4 minus x squared. Again, anytime you see that x squared or x with the minus, we want to rewrite it with a negative 1, which flips it. And now x squared minus 4, that's a difference of squares, x plus 2 and x minus 2. So now our restrictions, everything from here. So x minus 3, x minus 5, x plus 2, x minus 2, x plus 6, and then x minus 3 is one that we've already written, thankfully. The negative 1, We don't need it to be a restriction because it doesn't have a variable. So x cannot equal 3, x cannot equal 5, x cannot equal -2, x cannot equal +2, and x cannot equal -6. So now let's start canceling the easy part. I have a pair of x minus 5s, a pair of x minus 2s, a pair of x minus 3s. So on top, I have an x plus 6 left. On the bottom, we've got a -1 and x plus 2. But again, remember that -1, we really would just prefer to write it with the negative sign on the outside and not needing the number 1. And there's your answer. You have your you try for yourself to work on, so go ahead and do that. And then unpause this when you're ready to check. All right, so again, the first thing that I do is I rewrite it, keeping the first fraction, flipping the second one, and then we factor. So the numerator should have become y minus 3 and y minus 2. We ran into that one again. Remember, the 6 has to be positive, but the 5 negative, so it has to be 2 negatives. Y cubed can't be factored, 4y squared can't be factored, and y squared plus 3y minus 10, you should have factored to y minus plus 5 and y minus 2. So our restrictions should have come from all of this. Well, y cubed, that just means y can't equal 0. Y plus 5, y minus 2. And again, having that y squared is the same as the y cubed. Y just can't equal 0. So that's kind of already accounted for. So now y also can't equal -5, and y can't equal +2. So now we start canceling. You should have canceled out y minus 2's. You also should have said, okay, I have 3 y's here and a y squared here. Well, I have more on the bottom. How many more? 1 more. So when we put this together, on top I've got the 4, and in parentheses y minus 3. On the bottom, I have left that y and a y plus 5. And there's your answer. Hopefully you have about 10 minutes or so left of class, and I want you to go ahead and start playing the next video so that next week you get a review day in class before your test.